So you found your perfect property, a lovely modern flat. The only problem is it's a lovely concrete building on the 19th floor, except you didn't know that was going to be a problem. Why is the lender worried? Well, we'll be discussing properties that the lenders might not like the sound of so that you can be prepared on your property search. Hello, welcome back to our channel and podcast. My name's Gemma, and here at WS we talk about all things relating to money, mortgages and positive money mindset. So if that interests you, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps with our YouTube algorithm and means that you won't miss out on any of our videos. On today's episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages, we have Iftikhar joining us again today. Iftikhar is a trained accountant and mortgage broker who has been in the industry for over 10 years, and he is also one of the founding directors here at WIS. Welcome back, Ifti. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Gemma?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. So today we are talking all about properties that lenders might not be too happy to grant mortgages for. So I thought today what we'll do is we'll just kind of go through them one by one, point by point. So let's start with ex-local authority housing.
Yes, some of the ex-local council properties are perceived to be kind of built with less standard material in the past. So therefore, some of the lenders are a little reluctant to lend to some of the ex-council properties. So as a general rule, some lenders don't lend to ex-local council properties because they think over a period of time, the property value might be going down for these properties. And also a lot of these are sort of surrounded by a lot of rented properties to council tenants. So coupled with the two, some lenders are reluctant to lend to these properties. There's always lenders who will lend out, but you might not have a comprehensive list of lenders who are willing to lend out to these properties. So if you are looking at a property like this, I'd say speak to an advisor first because they might be able to tell you how difficult is it or how easy is it to get a mortgage for this kind of property. But just be mindful, there are a lot of areas where, ex-local council properties have been taken by people and they've sort of really developed those houses, and some of them are way expensive than the standard house price in the UK as well. So people have done that. So you can't categorically say, no, you can't do this, but there are exceptions. So we should be able to look at this, yeah.
Right. So I suppose basically things to bear in mind is if it is ex-local authority housing, potentially you could be more limited with the amount of lenders that will lend to you, and then possibly the rates might be higher because of you don't have competition.
Yeah, that's right. Because you only have a small pool. So if you have a small pool, the cheapest lender might not be in that pool. So you might miss out on that. But like I said, there are lenders who lend and, there are some properties which is of good standard, right? So then the lenders won't write those off. So there could be options for you. But it's always best to check before you apply for this kind of property.
All right. Thanks, Ifti. Next one on the list, we have high-rise flats. So this is about the 19th floor flat that I mentioned earlier. What could be the problem with that?
Okay, so obviously we've all seen Grenfell Tower. It's very unfortunate what happened. So these are the kind of things that lenders are worried about with high-rise apartments because there's always a fire risk. Therefore, lenders are a little reluctant, and also build quality. The higher you go, the structures have to be sound and everything else has to be sound as well. So therefore, lenders sometimes leave out high-rise buildings. Usually, I'd say about 6 floors is fine. 6 to 8 floors are generally fine with most lenders. But if you're going beyond that, you have to be a little careful. Again, there'll be a lender, but just a small pool to choose from. So that might limit your options, so which means you may get a higher rate of interest or you might miss out on some of the tier 1 lenders. Like I said, again, it's always good to check with these types of properties. And also you've got to be mindful if it's high-rise buildings, generally lenders check whether there is a lift because with staircases, they're not very happy. Obviously, just imagine even from your point of view, if you buy a bed and you have to carry it up to 7th floor, it's not the easiest things to do, right? So those are the things that lenders look at, right? So, yeah.
Okay, so the penthouse apartment might not be a good shout.
Yeah, with some lenders, no, it might not be.
Okay. The next one we've got is properties built of concrete. Now, I think this one catches out a lot of people because I don't think people realize that concrete is an issue.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for me, concrete sounds like it's very strong, right? So that's what it is. But some lenders don't see that because they say the material sometimes that goes into concrete may not be of good standard. One thing for everybody to note is lenders love standard stuff, right? If it's brick and tile, that's what lenders generally like. But if you have a sort of a slightly different formula that's been used, They like to look at it in a little bit more detail. But concrete is one thing that a lot of lenders stay out of. So if you have that kind of property, we may have to look at a specialist lender. It's not that you can't get a mortgage, but your options might be limited. So therefore, it's always, if you're looking at a property like that, before spending your money on the valuation, it's always best to check to see, what do you think the lender will think about this. So that's always a good step for you to do, because last thing you want is to waste money on valuations and lender turns around and says, sorry, this is not up to standard sort of thing. So always check on these things. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the next one we've got is properties that have commercial areas. So we're talking here probably, like with a flat above a shop or something, right?
That's right. Yeah. Again, there's lenders are very reluctant with commercial properties at the bottom. So if there is a ground floor with a commercial property and, you're on the first floor, second floor, lenders are a little reluctant, especially if there's a risk of a fire, right? So for example, if you've got a bakery downstairs, lenders may not like it because there's a fire risk. Or, if somebody who's cooking something, a restaurant downstairs, they don't like. Places where they sell alcohol, they don't like. And also the smells, right? So if there is smell, sometimes when you cook, there smells, lenders don't like it, right? They're a little bit more easy if it's like an office downstairs, but again, it's not straightforward. As soon as you say there's a commercial property downstairs, a lot of lenders shy away, right? But like I said, the first few where there's a hazard, those are the ones that lenders definitely want to stay away. So always double check these things before you make an offer. Because, like I said, last thing you want to do is do a valuation and then realize, the lender is not happy with it, so you lost your money.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ifti. The next one I've got on my list, properties with annexes or 2 kitchens. Not many properties, I imagine, come with 2 kitchens, but why would that be a problem?
Okay, so this is a problem. I mean, if somebody's thinking of building an annex after they buy the property, it's something that you're not supposed to do because banks don't like it, right? So likewise, if you're trying to buy a property which has an annex, the first thing banks think is you're going to rent it out because, annex is generally connected to the house. And especially if you have a separate kitchen, you can rent it out to a small family or an individual who's going to live there and they're going to be cooking for themselves, right? So if you got that, banks are very reluctant to lend, right? If you take the main high street banks, there's only just a handful who will look at it. And that too is subject to the valuers and the underwriters' comments, right? So therefore, be very careful. If you got a separate door, if you got a separate kitchen, those are properties which by default, most lenders think you're going to rent out that part of the property. Because the whole idea of a residential property is for you to live and it's not for you to let, right? So that bit they don't like because it becomes part commercial then, right? So therefore, lenders like to stay away from that. So be careful if you're trying to do that. I'm not saying there isn't lenders, but you won't have a comprehensive big list to select from. You might have just a handful and the rates may reflect a commercial rate as well, right? So it's always good to check on these ones.
Okay, cool. Thanks. The next on the list is multi-unit blocks.
Okay, so multi-unit blocks is usually, it's on one freehold. So you got, within the same freehold, you got small units, right? So it's like small flats within the same unit sort of thing, but it only has one freehold. So it's freehold is owned by one person and you got these small units, which is still part of that, right? So you got, may have 6 units under this. So it's not quite a leasehold as such, but it's like within the freehold, you got separate units. So these are ones that lenders don't like because with apartments, most of the time they like leaseholds, right? So they don't have a problem with it. But when you have this type of arrangements, sometimes the lenders don't like it. And also the square footage of these can be much smaller as well because there's a generally accepted practice that most of the time lenders won't look at properties less than 30 square meters. So it might not even tick those boxes if you have these units. So be careful with this because some people think, oh, wow, I can buy this. I've got units. I can rent it out separately. But, it's something that lenders don't like. Again, double check on these things because the ones we are talking today, what we spoke about now, are all these things one may not like, but there might be others who like it. But it's still, these are going to be quite restricted anyway.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. The next one we've got is live and work units. So I'm guessing because you're working in a space that you're living, that can kind of throw off the lender a little bit.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing because a residential mortgage is for residential purposes. But if you're using it for a business, lenders generally don't like it because it's meant for residential purposes. So with this kind of units, it's a mix. So therefore, lenders don't like it. So again, if you're trying to buy something, there will be few lenders who lend money to you, but it will be a few lenders, right? So it's always best to double check before you make an application to the bank. I know these concepts are getting popular because of COVID stuff, and a lot of people have to work from home, do their businesses from home.
Yeah.
But it's something that lenders don't like. I mean, they don't mind you working from home, but if it's kind of part work, part residential, that's the one they start to get funny about, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the next one on the list is a little bit of a surprise for me, studio flats. Is it anything to do with the size of them? Is that what the concern is?
It is. Again, I think I touched this a little earlier. Most lenders like properties which are more than 30 square meters. So if you don't have that square meterage, lenders will sort of stay away from those properties. So studios, it's fine so long as that covers that. Again, there'll be an odd lender who say, okay, we are okay with 25 square meters. So they will be okay. But like I said, it's an odd lender. It's not everyone. Studios are good to rent out for sure. I've seen a lot of clients buy studios and rent it out. But you've got to make sure you tick that box, right? Because sometimes you may find a lender, but when you go to remortgage, you might struggle to find another lender. So you're kind of stuck with that lender. So just be a little mindful of these things, because sometimes it might restrict your options. If not now, it might restrict it later.
Okay. And the next on the list, new build or renovated properties. So what's the deal with new builds?
Yeah, so with new builds, the biggest problem is it's like buying a new car. You drive the car off the showroom, you lost 20%, 25% of the value. So it's gone. So likewise, with a new build, you lose that. It's not that the property value actually goes down. Obviously, you pay extra because of the new factor of the property. But what happens usually is you're up against similar properties who are selling, right? So for example, you bought a property for say 100,000. If your neighbor brand new property will probably sell at the same price, right? So if you want to sell the property tomorrow, somebody coming to buy a house will prefer the new build than yours, even if you lived in it for only 2-3 months, because he's got an option to buy the new property, right? So that's the problem with the new build or these renovations, because they sometimes lose value initially and it picks up, right? So that's the problem.
Yeah.
So with that, lenders are sometimes reluctant. They will give you mortgages for new builds, but they may say you might have to put a bigger deposit because they're worried that you might lose that initial bit, right? So if they have to do a forced sale, it's a problem.
So when you say lose, do you mean it's sort of down valued?
So yeah, so for example, tomorrow, if I'm trying to sell the property, it'll probably be down valued because the guy who's coming to buy my house has the option to buy my neighbor's house where nobody has lived before. So that's why lenders are reluctant. Fair enough, because that's what will happen in reality. It's not properties they wouldn't lend, but they might lend lesser, right? So instead of putting a 10% deposit, they might say we need 15%. Or if it's a buy-to-let, instead of 25%, they might say, can you put 30% down? So you could have that.
So maybe it's best to think about being in a new build a bit more long term to kind of recuperate those costs, maybe?
Yeah, that's right. So long term, in the long run, I think generally it picks up with house prices rising, new builds will also rise.
Yeah.
And there is always demand because people like the new factor anyway, right? Some people prefer houses, even if it's 2-3 years old, it feels new because the guarantee is still on, because most of the time you have a 10-year guarantee. So you have all those advantages on a new build. But at the same time, lenders initially are a little reluctant to give you all the money you want.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. The next on the list, we've got freehold flats. I was personally quite surprised to find out that freehold flats could be a problem. But yeah, tell us more about why that is.
Freehold flats is a problem in England, not in Scotland, right? Because in Scotland, I know they use a slightly different name, but most properties are freehold up there. So therefore, in those areas, it won't be a problem. But if you come southwards, it's generally a problem because what happens is if you have a leasehold, there is a management company involved and they are kind of responsible for the insurance and certain common things they are responsible. But with a freehold, what happens is you kind of split it up effectively. So when you split it up, if it's a leak, you got to go and talk to the person on top, and there's no management company involved. So it's a little bit more complicated. So lenders try to shy away from these kind of properties. So I'm not saying you can't do a mortgage, but it will restrict your options for sure, because lenders like when things are very clear cut, right? If you do something which is extraordinary or outside the norm, they just don't like it, right? A lot of people will go away from that, right? So you might be just left with a handful of lenders here.
Okay, the next on the list we've got is flying freehold.
Yeah.
Now, what is that for everyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, so it is a freehold, but usually it's kind of connected to another property. I'll just give an example, right? I did a mortgage for one of my clients who had part of his property on top of somebody else's garage, right? So that's called a flying freehold. So it was on top of somebody else's garage. So somebody downstairs owns another property, but you have your part of the property on top of his property. So those kind of arrangements is where flying freeholds come into the picture. Again, it's something that some lenders don't like. So if you have setups like that, it's always best to talk to an advisor because they can check with the banks before you apply. Not that lenders won't lend, but you probably want to check before you proceed. And you've got to think of it long term as well, because remember, you're going to sell this property in future to somebody down the line. So if you're going to do that, they will have a step problem. So you better plan for that in advance, because that's a risk you're in. So because you might find a beautiful property, but it might have this complication. So even though the property is beautiful and you love the property and every other box ticks for you, but the problem might be that you might not be able to sell it in future. So always check properties like that.
Okay, thanks, Ifti. The next one on the list, we've got inhabitable properties. So I'm guessing this might be for the budding investor looking, maybe at auctions or something.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who go for auctions and have cash, they will just go and buy it because there's no mortgage involved. But with the mortgage, usually you need to have a bathroom, then you have to have a kitchen. So those things are like kind of compulsory for the property to have, because otherwise without a bathroom or a toilet, you can't live in the property. Without a kitchen, you can't cook in the property. So therefore, lenders are reluctant when you don't have that. They get worried.
Even if you're planning on sort of putting one in, is that still a problem?
Generally it is, because that's not as per the lender's guidance or criteria, we call it, right? So if it's outside their guidance, they won't accept it. Again, there'll be an odd lender who will give you a mortgage, but not all lenders will consider that. So inhabitable is always a big question mark, right? So always check with an advisor if you have a situation like that.
Yeah, okay. Next one on the list we've got is eco homes.
I think we have to be careful how we look at this, because a lot of homes are moving towards eco homes. But with eco homes, there is some certain setups that the lenders didn't like, right? But it's changing because the government and people are getting more environmentally cautious nowadays, right? So we will see more and more eco homes coming up, and lenders are sort of gearing for these things now, because we see eco mortgages or green mortgages. We hear these things, right? So these things are now coming up. So things are getting better. But if you are looking at an eco home, again, talk, because that's the best thing you can do, because it may not be for all lenders, right? So because they are still, adapting to it, it's taking time. Like I said, with most properties, if it's standard build, brick and, tiles as a roof, that's the one that the lenders like the most, right? If you're going to have something outside the norm, it's always best to check.
Great, thanks, Ifti. The next and the final one that we've got is short leases.
That's something very important, because like I said, most apartments down south, especially in England, is on a leasehold. So leasehold is great, but the problem is there is a freehold on a leasehold, which is generally owned by someone else, right? So because you're only responsible for your unit, right? So there is always a freehold, and the freeholder has a say in that. So if you have a long lease, right? Usually when I say long, with most lenders, up to about 80% lease left is okay. But if it is less than that, lenders slowly walk off saying that this is not for us. So the shorter the lease, it's more difficult to get a mortgage. Now you can get your leases extended. It costs money. If say a lender says, okay, you got 50 years left in your lease, we are happy to take your mortgage. You need to think, okay, I've got to get my lease extended, because next time you may have a problem trying to remortgage or selling to somebody else in future. You may have a problem. So you definitely want to consider how much that costs, right? Because even if you manage to find a lender, you may have a problem in future, because 10 years down the line, you only have 40 years left then, right? So which makes it more difficult to get the lease.
Yep.
So always consider that. I have had situations where clients have insisted that the seller gets the lease extended before they buy the property. So if you can come to some arrangement like that, that's always good. But sometimes when you have a situation like that, that will be reflected in the price as well. And with extending the lease, there are certain rules as well, right? So it's not very straightforward. You probably want to check that as well before you buy the property, because there are rules around that. So those are things that you might want to consider. But like I said, longer the lease, the better. But I see a lot of houses coming up with 999 years lease. Perfect, nothing to worry. But there are some other properties which were built in the sort of 80s, which had 125 years lease or 120 years lease. Now, between 80s and now 40 years is gone, right? So they're now getting into that 80-year period where some lenders are starting to think, we might not want to do this house. So that's the one you need to worry about.
Well, thank you, Ifti, again for some more great advice. And I just want to put a reminder out there that this advice may or may not be applicable to everybody. So please do talk to an advisor if you're unsure whether the advice is suitable for you. If you don't have an advisor, then I will leave our WS contact details below, as we are always happy to help. And we do offer free advice for those of you wondering. Another little reminder that a mortgage is secured against a home or property, so it may be repossessed if you do not keep up with the mortgage repayments. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Let's Talk Money and Mortgages. Have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.